morning, rise and shine together. Day 90. What? It is also the very last day of March of 2022, excuse me. Or it's another day whenever you're watching this, but today for me, it is March 31st, 2022. And 90 days is a big milestone in the world of habit change. And I'm on the cusp. I've stuck with something long enough that I'm starting, the breakthroughs and the changes will start even happening more exponentially. And then now I can start really maybe stacking other habits, growing, and maybe adding new things. This one is solid enough now. You don't want to be too confident that you've got it. You got to still put, things in place to make sure. But it's part of it's just what I do. So, and that is how you change your life and have a new lifestyle, is consistency trumps everything. And finding those things that work for you, that you can be consistent with. So rather than sometimes anyway, I'm not going to go there because y'all, God put something on my heart that I know it's always from God, but today is a little more obvious because I do not have a green thumb. He put the whole analogy of a garden and weeds on my heart today. And I know nothing about any of this. I know conceptually because I've read about things. I hear people talk about it. I know people that like to garden. But that particular, that has just skipped me. I don't know how to do it personally. Other than maybe buying a potted plant, setting it on my porch, and forgetting to water it, and then not taking it. Anyway, true stories. So, and how I'm reading Psalm 4. Well, I read several chapters this morning, but the one that's really just grabbed my attention was Psalm 40. And David is like, I've waited patiently for you. Eventually you have come and restored me. You're making my legs steady as I am learning to walk in my ways, in your ways. He says things like, I finally get it now. You don't really care about burnt offerings and sacrifices. You care about what's written on my heart. And, he goes on in this vein. And I will not hide it anymore. It's just such a part of me. I can't keep a lid on it. I will, talk about it to anybody. I'm going to share this good news that it is the burnt offerings and sacrifices. And it's like a foreshadowing of Jesus again. David gets what's coming, the good news that's coming. He even refers to it as good news. And he's like, it's symbolic, it's representative, but in and of itself, it means nothing unless it's from the heart. And again, why the analogy of a garden? Well, I kind of do know why. I had somebody reach out to me and ask me to help her understand a biblical perspective on generational curses or generational sin, breaking cycles of, and we don't have to use those words, but those generational things that just cause trouble in families. And when somebody is finally like, all right, I had enough of this. I'm going to do the work and figure it out. Which that is me. This is my journey. I love my family, all good people doing the best that they could on both sides. married into a good family, like in general, like, so this isn't a personal judgment, but we've all got garbage. We've all got weeds. That's part of why I think the analogy of a garden made sense to me, because not only are our hearts individual gardens, but those gardens got planted by the generations before us, and our experiences of life, and like all of that feeds into how our hearts and lives and what shows up on the surface of our lives is things that have been put in our hearts. And some are of our own doing. Some, it's just how we were raised. And, you know, it just comes through the generations. But we each are responsible for our own individual lives and our individual fruit and what comes of it. And some people just don't know any better. Like, you might be listening to this going, what in the world is she talking about? Because nobody's ever talked to you about these kinds of things, and that your thoughts and your beliefs might not really be yours. They might be just something that was planted in you generationally, and you've never really stopped to think, is this what I believe? Is this how I want to show up in life? Is this how I want to experience life? You might not think you've got a choice. Like, all of this might just be new to you. You know, we are just so caught up. I mean, there's a lot to do in a day as an adult, a lot to take care of. And a lot of us are like, I don't have time to think about this kind of stuff. I got bills to pay. I got kids to raise. I got, you know, whatever it is. And all of that's true. But living consciously is always a choice. And when it's a priority to you, you find a way. Because believe me, I got all the same things that everybody else does. And seasons of life where I'm like, how do I even come up for air? But that's part of why I get up so crazy early, why I rise and do this in the morning before all of those things can come in and just, you know, take my attention and head, heart, you know, in different directions. So, and this morning, God actually was like, and you're kind of a weed too. And I thought, ouch, that's not very nice. But I think it's true. But it's not necessarily my fault. It is my responsibility. So this is where I think the generational thing comes in. Like, it's not always our fault, but it is our responsibility. Once you know it and you see it for what it is, and then you don't make changes and you don't do things about it, then it can become your fault, if you are tracking with me now. And for anybody that's watched me before, you've heard me talk about, you know, one of my personal struggles is I moved a lot as a child. And not only that, but my family of origin, my parents did not like each other. So it was a very unstable, chaotic, you know, and they were each kids too. Like, they were 18 when I was born. So it was a kid raising kid. And of course they had all the baggage from their generations and all the dysfunction. So when I talk about this, it's with no malice or blame or like, I can't believe it. Just is. It was what it was. It is what it is. And they were and I love each one of my parents. But there were a lot of weeds in those gardens, a lot of weeds that have been just passed out. Nobody took the time to examine them, pluck them out. Maybe behaviorally, you can, you know, cut a weed off at the surface and the garden looks pretty, but those roots weren't dealt with. Yeah. And so that's what I have been kind of still bumping up against. Like, I've made a lot of behavioral changes, and with some things I've gotten to the roots, but there's still a lot of roots under there. And they're not necessarily ones that I planted. They were planted, and they've been there a long time, but they do choke out, the ability of the garden of my heart and the garden of my life to bloom to its fullest potential if I don't deal with those roots. You know what I'm saying? Hey, good morning. So there was another root that popped up for me this past week. I was really just struggling with something, and I thought, what's going on here? Let's figure this out. I'm tired of dealing with this. So I went to some trusted friends. I prayed about it, went to God, and you know what? There were these weeds from a particular way my dad interacted with us that was still having some residual effects and triggers in my life. And I wasn't, and it's so ingrained in me. It's been there my whole life. It's so familiar. I didn't even see it as a weed or a thing that needed to be dealt with. I didn't know. I just thought, oh, isn't this just what people do? No. And so now that I can see it for what it is, I can really get to those roots and those weeds. And then I even think about further with the analogy of God kind of telling me that I'm a little bit of a weed myself. It hurts still. All right. But anyway, that's how we can transform, by seeing ourselves for what we are, and then being willing to do the work and change and get in those roots and get some miracle grow going with God. And I think this might even be part of my experience of not being able to feel rooted in life, in a home, in myself, because generationally, there's just too many weeds choking me out to let me even have my own roots to plant and grow deep. And that's, I think, how weeds might show up in your life maybe very differently. But we all have them, because we're all people who come from other faulty people who were just doing their best with faulty thinking and dysfunction and, all those things. But once you start to see these things, that's when it does become your responsibility. It may not be your fault, but it's your responsibility. Your heart and the fruit of your particular life is your responsibility. And if it is not blooming or growing the way that you want it to, or that it could, you got to get in there and do some weeding. And if you think you've done weeding, but you still are not growing the way that you should, you're going to have to maybe dig a little deeper. There's still some roots in there that are choking out the nutrients from your life and your heart. And whether or not you're on a spiritual journey, of course, I can only speak to authentically for where I am. I know the Supreme Gardener, and He helps me show me where there are still weeds, and how I'm even still a little bit of a weed. I might be a cute weed, but I'm still a weed. And I've got some transforming left to do. But I slowly am feeling like I'm becoming a flower, and that my garden, the garden of my heart and the soil, is becoming more and more fertile, where some roots really can grow deep, and where God is really helping me with that. So wherever you are, if you're seeking, if you're like, I don't believe in this stuff, maybe just be open to it. Many years ago, I was definitely like, if I heard the word God or Jesus or anything, I was like, stop, thank you, no. Again, because of another weed that had been planted in my heart, because my dad was a preacher. I'm a preacher's kid. And I turned my back on God because of the weeds that were generationally in my family. And I was watching my dad do some stuff that didn't line up. And it made me think, well, if that's what God does for people, no, thank you. So I will tell you, though, God will seek you out. And finally, I opened my heart back up. And I see that my dad he was a human, struggling with a lot of, he allowed a lot of weeds to grow in his heart. And rather than doing the hard work to deal with them, he covered it up, turned away, allowed those things to grow. Because it is hard work. I'm not going to lie. This is not for the faint of heart to look at yourself this honestly and then do the work to change and weed your garden. So anyway, that seems like that is the journey that David did really well. He tended the garden of his heart. He constantly, even through the prayers and the calling out and being on his knees, he was taking, his garden to the ultimate gardener and saying, help me get rid of these weeds. They're killing me. They're choking me. They're making me sick. I don't want them anymore. Help me to deal with them. He didn't try to just do it on his own or ignore it, or even when he did ignore it for a while, because sometimes it's fun to let those weeds grow a little bit. But eventually they do choke literally the life out of you, just like they do in a garden, and they will take over, and before you know it, you can't even see the beautiful flowers anymore, and you get so used to the look of the weeds, you think you've got a good garden there. I know there are people that really love weeds. Anyway, thanks for sticking with my little analogy today from a non-gardener. Maybe I will be one day. Maybe God's even planting that seed in my heart. Once I have my permanent home and I'm feeling rooted and wherever I am, maybe I'll have a fantastic garden that'll be a symbol of that one day. So anyway, just listen to what God may be speaking to you, and even what's speaking to you in your habits. If you've got things popping up in your life and you keep trying to ignore them or deal with them or work them into your life, but you know that they're choking the life out of your life, then it becomes your responsibility, because then it's in your awareness. And it might not be your fault. It could be something that your parents, your grandparents, generations way before planted, and now you're